What is the most superhuman thing you have ever seen anyone do? In New Zealand, after the Christchurch earthquake a few years ago, there was random footage of people helping at collapsed buildings, etc. In the background of one shot, clearly not really noticed by anyone at the time, was a dude picking up massive chunks of concrete walls building and was just tossing it out of the way like it was made of paper. The country as a whole nicknamed him Incredibro Hulk. His response, once media figured out who he was that the weight of what he was grabbing hadn't even occurred to him. He just knew there were potentially still people alive under it, so it had to go. My dad was trying to get into knife throwing. One of my younger brothers grabbed a throwing knife and throws it at another younger sibling. My dad reaches out and grabs the knife, point first, before it does any damage. He was barely cut due to the thick calluses from his job. I was only 12 at the time and I was really impressed about how good his reflexes were. Had my Chevy 1500 fall on me, the jack slid out and the jack stand folded under the weight. The rotor pinned my thigh to the ground. My stepbrother, who is like 5 feet 6 inches mind you, grabbed the bumper and lifted the truck up enough that I was able to slide out. Didn't break anything, but tore a lot of muscle on my thigh. I thank him every time I see him, because it messed up his back. He's not a big guy. What he did was a featuring a strength that I do not think I could do, and I'm a lot bigger than he is. Adrenaline is a heck of a drug. I work in a major trauma hospital in London, and we once had this young boy arrive in the middle of the night whose arm, from the elbow down, had been completely sliced off by a machete. The policeman arrived a few minutes later looking as white as a sheet, holding a bag with the arm inside. This boy is knocking at death's door. The arm has a tourniquet on, but he has lost so much blood that even after 16 units, the highest we could get his blood pressure was around 87 systolic. Within about 5 minutes of being inside our department, the boy gets rushed off to theater, and when we turn the corner all of a sudden we see the trauma surgeon running along the theater floor. His sterile gown flying behind him looks like a goddamn cape, and it's like something out of a freaking movie. I wasn't present for the surgery, but I know he did it. He spent about 15 hours, but he reattached all the vessels, the ligaments and everything that needed to be done for that arm. I think after a few months it was pretty much fully functional again. Might seem pretty non-superhero, but to me he is a superhuman. He reattached a freaking arm. That's basically unheard of in the majority of human history, so it's pretty superhuman. I had a professor who learned the names of every single student in all of his classes, some of which had 300 plus in a lecture, and a little bit about each of them. He could go up to anyone who had been in his class in the past few years and have a relevant conversation about their interests and what was going on in their lives. To be fair, he had a great system in place to allow him to do this. He took photos of each student with their names and memorized them on flashcards, and he had a ton of student aides who each got assigned a subset of the students to get to know much better and talk about at the student aid meetings. And he assigned a lot of meaningful personal assignments, asked students to talk about how the subject applied to their lives in class, and held fun extracurricular events for extra credit. But still, going to all that trouble, care about and really get to know every single student was pretty superhumanly awesome if you ask me. He absolutely changed my life. One of my teachers always went the extra mile to remember every one of us and whatever mistake, be it small or big, we ever committed. He never gave room for anyone to move on with their lives. Sucker. He messed up with a lot of us, leaving a bitter memory about our high school. When I was in college, all students in our city used to go party in the same street that's filled with bars. In that street there's also a fries shop where the owner would take like 10-15 people's orders at the same time without writing them down, and he'd never mess up an order. He was a living legend, and I've never met a person who studied in this city that didn't eat at that place. Like it would be 4 AM. And there would be lines of drunk students out the door, and not once have I seen or heard of an order being messed up while nothing gets written down. It's insane. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. His son took over the business and shares the same talent. I got my finger trapped in my bike chain when I was reattaching it to the cog. My finger wasn't able to just pull out or even move the chain. My dad came out and snapped the chain in half as if it was nothing. One time I was walking on a super busy street when this girl tripped and almost landed straight into the traffic, except this dude who was also walking close by grabbed her before she bit the dust and pulled her up. It happened really fast and looked cool. My granddad. I know everyone thinks their family is a bit like this when they're a kid, but he's slightly different. For context, he is a slight 5'4" average man, retired to a warm country nearby, usually 30-35 C in summer, and in all these stories is between 70 to 77 yo. I once turned up at the airport to see him and grandma picked me up as he was busy. Turns out busy was that he looped rope around the chimney stack, 2-story house, and was hanging out of another loop almost upside down, painting the house with no visible way of having got up there except climbing the rope from the roof. My gran took me to the supermarket, and when we got back he was 35 feet up in a pine tree sawing a branch that was getting in the way of his view of the green on the golf course next to us. He was stood on the branch he was sawing. Me and him went to the hardware store, and on the way home he became convinced that the suspension in his 90s Toyota was squeaking. I do car stuff too and couldn't hear it. In the time I took to go round the house and get into my swimming trunks, he'd got the car up on a jack and axle stands, dropped the whole rear axle off the car, dismantled one of the hubs, and was sat on a tire inspecting a bush. He asked me to dig a short trench for some lemon trees. Due to the hard volcanic soil and the 35°C plus heat at 11 AM, after 2 hours I gave up and went for an ice cream, planning to try again at 3 PM. I came back at 2 PM and he'd finished it himself. I'd not even got 1/3 of the way through. I once came back from the beach and found him balanced on one leg on the top step of a ladder under the eaves of the house. In one hand he had a full-size workshop air compressor, the big on wheels kind, and the other hand was spraying under the roof tiles. He was coughing furiously. I went inside and asked my grandma what was going on. She told me he'd filled the air compressor with a weak chlorine he'd made from pool supplies and was trying to smoke out some bats. I went back out and could see the bats were just staring back at him. He gave up soon after. I could barely lift the compressor on the ground. My guardian once forgot to set the parking brake. He was working under the car. It ran over him and stopped. Then he just lifted it off and walked away with a bruised arm. I was like 5 at the time. In high school, my marching band director could control the weather. We lived in the rainy south near the coast, where summer storms were common. It never rained during practice. All 4 years of high school. The one time it did, the director threw his little clipboard on the ground and just stared up at the sky, and it just stopped. He was a strange man. My dad was really smart with math. Every time I asked about an equation or formulas, he would always know in a second what to do. He helped me to understand math and how to use it. Later on I asked him why didn't he become a math professor. It was because he had PTSD and didn't want to affect the school children with his traumatic backslashes and see him sad. Sadly, he passed away in 2018 of a heart attack at the age of 50. Sorry to hear that. Sounded like a great man. Maybe trivial, but I find it cool that my girlfriend can taste pretty much any food once and identify most of the ingredients, or at least trace amounts of one particular ingredient. This cake has nutmeg. This fried chicken has ginger. This brownie has coconut oil. This crappy lemonade slush has basil. WTF. This caviar spread has egg, mayonnaise, cream cheese, and choose a bit more, some onion. Me eating a brown cake. This is chocolate. My mum and I have this superpower. It can be really annoying when you use a glass or bowl after it's been through the dishwasher, since anything you put it in tastes faintly of washing powder. My husband lifted the front of a VW car off of a child who had been hit and had his neck under the front wheel. This saved his life and he was awarded by the police and our city. He's a keeper. This kid's when I was in 6th grade, had taken pre-algebra and was a part of a smart kids club called PEP. Holy crap. He was the greatest mathematician I'd ever seen in my life. He solved math equations usually faster than the teacher could finish asking and before the other students would process the information. When I was a 6th grader, I rode the bus home. Halfway through the route, the bus would pick up kids from another school. These kids would often encourage the bus driver to speed over dips and bumps, as it would launch the kids a few inches in the air. She never did it until one time when she took a bump at 45 miles per hour. Kids hit the luggage racks, flew across seats, and the emergency door at the back flew open and this 10-year-old kid fell out of the bus. Now the bus was slowing down at this point but still traveling fairly quickly, and this kid rolled back to his feet in one fluid motion, sprinted up to the bus and leapt the 5 or so feet back through the doorway like he wasn't forcibly ejected from a moving vehicle. Yeehaw. Why wasn't she arrested? Fired. Watched a friend of mine get kicked in his junk with enough force to make Hiroshima and Nagasaki look like a joke while in a heated argument with some girl. He just took and continued arguing like this attempt to ruin his day did nothing to him at all. Hint, that's his kink. I was with a family friend helping out in the back garden. This was in France where everyone's back gardens are the size of a small island. Anyway, as we're doing some weeding we hear commotion coming from the front. We run over and the Corando's handbrake failed and it rolled over the dog, trapping the dog under the car. This woman ran over to the car and just lifted this heavy freaking off-road vehicle like it was a piece of paper. The dog is fine BTW, and if you google the car it will come up with the new ones. It's the 1998 one she's got, I think. When I was learning to play ice hockey as a child, we had the usual kid who thought he was shit but not nearly as skilled as he thought. Fast as heck but no accuracy whatsoever, still better than I ever was though. We practiced at the local rink so it didn't have plexi above the walls, and one day this kid has a moment where he decides to try a slapshot. Puck completely goes off course and headed toward the stands, and one of the coaches just skates by and plucks it out of the air, throws it back on the ice and shakes his hand looking mildly uncomfortable before skating up to the kid and sending him to the box for being a moron. Thought of him as Coach Spider-Man forever after that. I was working in a clinic and a mum brought in a floppy blue newborn baby. The doctor on duty was a man who stands 6 feet 6 inches. We put the baby on a trolley and the doctor undressed the baby and lay his hand on the baby's body. The doctor's hand pretty much covered baby's whole body. The doctor then directed me and 2 other nurses as to what he wanted us to do. He was so calm and so clear, and he saved that baby's life. The baby had pneumonia and hypothermia. Baby spent 2 weeks in ICU. I only worked with him for a short while and never really told him how awesome he was saving that baby. I know that's what doctors are supposed to do, but he did it so well and so gracefully. This one kid in my psych class finishes every single test. Most tests are about 50-60 questions in about 10 minutes. Every time they go up and turn it in I'm like, dude, what the actual frick? A welterweight Cambodian in an exhibition and gambling MMA match about 9 years ago. Cambodian whose parents had to deal with the Khmer Rouge bore the scars of that. His whole fam was super poor. Dude was completely illiterate, mathematically and language. But oh sweet Christ could he fight. I've watched him fight 4 times, but the one etched into my memory is one with this opponent. An Aussie stand-up fighter. Roided up 5 feet 8, 5'9" feet dude. Aussie led with a left jab uppercut feint and then a hard right hook. Cambodian broke the fist of the jab with his own left horizontal elbow and moved inside the Aussie's hook for a right hook of his own. The whole fight was maybe 3 seconds. Aussie guy was knocked cold and his left hand was super broken. Anyone here who's boxed or done some serious competition knows that kind of balls belongs in the Matrix. I will never unsee that. Almost like that scene in Snatch. Knew a dude in high school who over the course of one part had 30-ish shots. Saw him the next morning at a store at like 9 o'clock looking completely normal. I still cannot believe that he didn't die. The good old coffee and weed speedball to hold off a hangover before it hits you like a brick at night, but it's all good cause you're going to sleep trick. My parents split up when I was 8. My dad was an active alcoholic, died of it. My mom was, and is, emotionally manipulative. Neither ever said a bad word about the other to my sister and I, ever. That crap blows my mind to look back on. I found this sad. One of my friends gave his last $10 to a fricked up and freezing cold tramp sitting on the sidewalk. My friend spent the next week starving until he got some money. Crap like that didn't matter to him. He never brought it up once. Never complained. Nothing. That's my definition of superhuman. Did you think about buying your friend some noodles or something lol? One guy in a class in high school could make a crackling noise with his hands that somehow made my and other people's ears crackle in response. I once was at a gathering where an activity available was to draw self-portrait on a balloon. I watched as one fellow said, "I'm no good at drawing faces." He then picked up a balloon and a Sharpie, and as I watched, drew a perfectly proportioned and detailed globe. He didn't lay anything out, just started in Europe and worked his way around. He outlined the shapes of islands the size of Jamaica and Sardinia. He compensated for the balloon being shaped like a balloon by making the southern hemisphere features skinnier. He had all the squiggly islands between Southeast Asia and Australia laid out perfectly. I've never seen anything else like it. I had a friend who did amateur MMA while we were in high school. He had all kinds of insane stories and I witnessed several of them. Apparently just after a fight he had gotten paid and was walking to his car. Guy tried to mug him at knife point and friend initially tried to avoid a confrontation. Dude won't leave without his wallet, so he beats the dude up and kept the knife because it was a nice knife. He apparently used to get punched, kicked in the balls fairly often due to fights and he just became kind of immune to it. I saw him get punched in the balls at a party by some really drunk guy and he didn't even flinch. He just calmly asked the guy to stop being a drunken idiot. There were numerous times he stopped a fight by standing in the way and just going, "Hey man, from here I can kick you in the throat." Person would always look at everyone else, I guess to see if he was serious. They usually backed down, although I can confirm he could kick you in the throat. I was once at the supermarket and there were these two massive guys that had a broken tire. One of the guys just lifted the small car while the other one replaced the tire. Then they just drove away like it was completely normal. My mind was blown away and I still think about it all the time. I haven't personally seen it, but back when I was in 1st or 2nd grade I had a classmate from Sri Lanka who went there on a family vacation. He was supposed to be there for about 2 weeks I think. In the middle of his vacation the big tsunami hit the area he was in. I still remember sitting in the classroom and listening to our teacher telling us that they didn't know if he was okay because they hadn't heard anything yet. He came back a week later than he was supposed to and he was okay, as was every one of his family members. He told us that they had been on high grounds and had seen the water disappear from the beach. Just below them there was a 3-meter high wall of some sort, and when the tsunami came close people started running away from the beach. A handful of people came running towards the place that they were in and he and his dad ran down there to get people to safety. There he saw a tiny woman who wasn't able to climb the wall as the other people did, so she jumped over it instead. A tiny woman fully jumped over a 3-meter high wall. Being so young we were all amazed, but it wasn't until I was a couple of years older that I realized it was because of adrenaline. One day when I was about 8 or 9 I was riding my bike in my neighborhood when this big Rottweiler ran out of a person's yard and plowed my bike over to get to me. This huge butt dog got a grip on my foot. Thankfully the dog had grabbed most of the sole of the shoe and wouldn't let go and I'm screaming like a banshee. Suddenly I see my dad running at us like a freight train and he tackles the dog and fricking yeets it 20 feet. Picks me and the bike up, one under each arm, and books it back to the house. IDK how he knew what was happening or where to find me. No idea how he heard me screaming or how he had gotten to me so fast because he was mowing our yard with headphones in and I was all the way on the other side of this huge butt neighborhood. When you're a parent you just know your kid's voice. I was at a wedding 3 weeks after giving birth. My spouse was in the wedding so I put Little by him so I could get some food. They were across the crowded room. When Little started to cry I heard it like he was right beside me. I asked if anyone else could hear it and they couldn't. I've seen a man throw back 30 drinks in an hour and a half, and half of those were shots. He wasn't conscious by the end, but he was alive, which is superhuman enough for a featuring like that. In boot camp they have you do this contest called Pugil Sticks. It's the classic crap you see on marine commercials. Helmet and a giant Q-tip that you battle with. It's harder than it looks and freaking hurts. They had us fight each other on a bridge so that anyone losing their balance would fall. If you won, you kept going until you lost. Some people would get smashed right away, or win one and then gas and get crushed, etc. I got lucky and defeated 2 people on the bridge before gassing and failing to block a blow directly to my head. Fell into a pit of shredded tire bits below and retreated to my platoon. Next I see my buddy go up. He's much stronger and bigger than I am. I expect him to down a couple guys, but what ensued was ridiculous. He literally felt like 8 or 9 guys in a row. Couldn't be stopped, so they started pitting 2 against him at a time. This didn't work and he fricked up 6 more guys before they literally just called off the exercise and trotted us off to do something else. It was the most legendary freaking crap I've ever seen. We still talk about it, and many other things at boot camp, despite it occurring like 9 years ago. My dad was in the back of a U-Haul truck with my uncle driving and me in the cabin talking to him via two-way radio. We were on our way from California to Utah. We were going downhill for a bit and my dad and I were talking about a video game I was playing on my PSP. I think it was an older Final Fantasy that he played, so he was giving me pointers. We then hit a large bump and my dad said the cable keeping the fridge secure snapped off. My uncle offered to stop but my dad said he'd fasten it real quick. 5 minutes later we reached an uphill area. We had about a 5-mile stretch of inclined turf, and we had to go slow because traffic. My dad and I kept talking but suddenly he went silent as we heard something from the trailer. I asked my dad what was going on and if we should stop. He didn't respond via the radio but yelled pull over loud enough for my uncle to barely hear. We were about to pull to the side of the road but there wasn't really a safe place for it. So my uncle grabbed the radio and told my dad it would be a few minutes. We reached a nearly flat area and stopped the truck, going to see what happened. The cable holding the fridge snapped out again and my dad held it in place while we were going uphill for over 10 minutes. A few other things behind the fridge also moved back with it, but he still kept it up. We stopped for an hour so my dad could rest in the cabin. I gave him my allowance money so he could get a beer at the stop. Luckily we also got some rope and secured the fridge better for the rest of the ride. I don't know how heavy everything was, but holding it up for that long took adrenaline and willpower. I would have stepped out of the way and tried dodging anything else, probably failing and getting hurt or crushed, but he just stood there and kept it up. We had an IED hit on up armored Humvee from above. Everyone was hurt and due for the truck commander was damaged so it couldn't be opened. We had a guy in our unit who had won every single strength competition put on during our deployment, usually by comical amounts. He ripped the 200+ pound door off the hinges to get to the wounded inside. It still seems sort of superhuman to me, although it's not. I used to cycle trails in a forest with my dad on a single speed bike when I was about 5 or 6. There was a hill that I swear had a 60-degree incline and was 700 ms long. I'd even swear it was longer. Anyway, every time we got to that hill my dad would whip out the nylon rope from his backpack and loop it around my fork stem and his seat stem, then proceed to cycle up that hill while pulling me up because I couldn't pedal up it on my own at the time, and for many years afterwards he did appear to be superhuman to me. Now cycling with my daughter who is 7 and doing a similar thing, I have to, sadly, admit that my dad wasn't so superhuman after all. Great dad though, both of you. I used to work at a vineyard that was right next to my boss's house and sometimes I would help him clean up his backyard. My boss was like 6 featuring 8 and had hands the size of my head. One day we were trying to load his kid's old swing set into the back of his ute, pickup truck for you Americans, when we realized there was no way it would fit. I was just about to suggest that we disassemble the thing when I look over and see him bend the swing set in half with his bare hands. Please note that when I say old swing set I simply mean no longer used, not rusty. My dad was an electrician and growing up I always wanted to help. When I was probably 10-12 years old he was working with 220 volt and was letting me put the cover on the plug. I'd done simple things like that before under supervision. The long screw that went in the middle I had in my hands and I missed the center hole and put it in one of the socket holes. My dad moved faster than I've ever seen anybody move and grabbed my hand and grounded himself so that he took almost the entire shock across the chest. He was pretty sore for several days after and I was fine. It wasn't until later on that I realized he could have easily died from that. TLDR. Stupid dog is invincible to the point of withstanding intense force and bone-crushing weight. This isn't about a person, but a dog. Specifically, my sister's dog Scout. She lives on a farm with her boyfriend and hundreds of animals, and a few years ago they got Scout because he is a herding dog. Good at his job and very enthusiastic, but nowhere near the sharpest tool in the shed. But this dog is built to fricking last. There was a time my sister's boyfriend was removing ticks from a horse and, long story short, The horse ended up kicking Scout in the face. He fell over onto his back, legs in the air, blood running out of his nose. He laid there for a good 2 minutes and they were ready to dig a grave when he suddenly popped up and continued with business as usual. Another time, they were unloading round bales from a truck, large bales of hay weighing in excess of 1,200 pounds, and one ended up rolling onto him as he was running by. Assuming there was no chance he survived, they continued with work and came back 20 minutes later to retrieve his body. They rolled the bale off. He immediately popped up and was walking around like nothing happened. There have been other instances, but too many to tell the tale of. Anyways, that was way too long. Thanks for reading. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.